I want to zero in now on a specific food. Ever since industrial agriculture has started producing tomatoes, they've begun looking the same. That's because consumers want the ripest, reddest, roundest tomatoes, and big businesses give them just that. The question, though, is what producing genetically identical tomatoes does for their taste and nutritional value. Joining us to discuss this is Barry Estabrook. He's the author of the book you see there, Tomatoland: How Modern Industrial Agriculture Destroyed Our Most Alluring Fruit. Barry, welcome. So what happened to our tomatoes?
Well, for the past 30 or 40 years, commercial plant breeders have bred primarily for one thing: huge quantities of perfect-looking tomatoes. And everything else went out the window. Flavor went out the window, nutrition went out the window, and we've ended up with the hard, tasteless tomatoes we have today.
And so can you talk about what that essentially does to the tomato? I mean, we have some tomatoes here. They look almost exactly alike. They look good, but really, what does it do to their nutritional value and to the taste? What does that essentially do to these nice-looking tomatoes?
Well, the less said about the taste of industrial tomatoes, the better. My opinion is if they don't taste like anything, you're ahead of the game. They don't have some sort of off flavor. But interestingly, a modern tomato like the one you're holding there has far fewer vitamins and minerals and other nutrients, other important nutrients like vitamin C and antioxidants, than a tomato that you could pick up in the grocery store in the 1960s. It's got a third less vitamin C, much less niacin. You go right down the line, those tomatoes have less than they did 50 years ago.
And how did this happen? I mean, is this driven by customer demand?
No, it's driven by what the farmers are paid for. One large tomato farmer in Florida quite honestly told me when I brought these subjects up to him, he said, "Barry, I don't get paid a cent for flavor. I don't get paid a cent for nutrition. I get paid per pound." So there was no incentive for breeders to create tasty, nutritious tomatoes. There was a lot of incentive for them to create plants that just sort of went into overdrive, putting out huge quantities of tasteless tomatoes.
And I know that a third of all fresh tomatoes grown in the USA come from Florida, where they're bred to look this way. What are the downsides to having them grown there?
Well, if you're familiar with Florida, it's called the Sunshine State, and it seems like it would be a good place to grow tomatoes. But the fact is, from a commercial perspective, you would have to be a fool to try to grow tomatoes in a place like Florida. The reason is Florida, for all of its warmth, is extremely humid. And there's nothing that will kill a tomato plant quicker than humidity. Everything, every bug, every disease, every fungus that will kill a tomato plant thrives in humidity.
So is it possible to have a tomato that's red, ripe, and delicious? Can we bring back those tomatoes that are good for you, or are they gone for good?
No, they're not. In fact, they're coming back, and researchers at the University of Florida are very close to coming out with a tomato that actually delivers flavor, is nutritious, and can withstand the indignities of industrial production. It'll probably be widely on the market within the next decade. There's no reason it can't be done. It's just there's been no incentive until recent years when people have showed a willingness to pay for premium tomatoes.
And ultimately, I mean, when you have these tomatoes that, I mean, they look good, but they're lacking in nutritional content, I mean, that's affecting America's diet.
Well, it is, particularly because we eat so many tomatoes and tomato products. When you think about all the things, all the salsas, all the ketchups, all the fresh tomatoes in salads, we eat a huge quantity. So a lot of our nutrients come from tomatoes.
And yeah, absolutely. I mean, Americans, we like to put ketchup on everything, right? I know that in your book you talk about the conditions in Florida of the fields where these are grown. Can you talk about that?
Well, in the worst case scenario, absolute abject slavery. No other word for it. And it's been many cases. There's been 1,500 slaves freed in the Florida tomato fields in the past 15 or so years. And we're talking about being locked in chains, or shackled in chains at night, being beaten if you don't work hard enough, being killed if you try to escape. And of course, people being bought and sold on the sides of road in Florida, just like, what does that sound like? 1850, not 2012.
Barry, this sounds awful. It sounds like blatant human rights violations. It sounds exactly like you described it, like slavery. How is it able to happen in Florida?
It's not like slavery. It is. When they prosecute these cases, and like I said, 1,500 slaves have been, they prosecuted under the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which is the amendment that freed the slaves. So they do it because unscrupulous crew bosses and companies that are interested in making things as inexpensive for themselves as possible will cut any corner. And the easiest corner to cut is labor.
Barry, I also, going back to food, we have a bunch of food. We did a food segment, and I'm looking at these bananas here, and they also look the same. They appear to be uniform, just like the tomatoes. Could there be a similar scenario playing out with bananas and other fruits and vegetables?
Well, those bananas you hold, like almost every other commercial banana in the world, are one single variety, Cavendish, and it's vulnerable to a serious infection that is wiping out banana plantations in certain areas of the world. So when you get things that are so genetically similar, it's just open season for any infections that will kill them.
So ultimately, I mean, is this the effect of, food becoming more commercialized? And even we talk a lot about the power of lobbyists and the amount of lobbying dollars that goes into agriculture and food. Is this ultimately an effect of all that?
It's the effect of changes that came over the supermarket business in the last 30 years, which is giant companies like Walmart. Walmart's now the biggest grocery store in America. And huge other grocery chains, all getting by these huge buying organizations are constantly putting downward pressure on prices. And so the farmers have to take any shortcut they can.
What will it take, Barry, to reverse this, to bring back, the good old tomatoes and to bring back the good old fruits and vegetables that were rich in nutrients and how do we get that back?
Well, it'll take consumers coming to their senses. I mean, the odd thing is that all sorts of surveys show that American consumers rank tomatoes, for instance, at the very bottom of their list of satisfied products in the supermarket, but we still buy them. I think when people get educated that you can have a good tomato if you get one grown locally in season, and that the world of difference in the taste, people will come along.
All right, Barry, we're out of time, but that is very interesting. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. That was Barry Estabrook, author of Tomatoland.